In this video, we're going to dive deeper into web components. So web components, as explained in the previous video, are in-house apps, but what sets them apart from your traditional web application is that they are designed to be reused across multiple applications or multiple times within an application. All right. So I have an in-house cloud web components, right, that we created in our previous video. And I have my demo application, which is a web application, and I have pulled in my web components by simply dragging and dropping the web components elements on my page, and then connecting to that web component using the ID provided in the App Builders tab in my Inhouz Cloud console. All right, and just like that, dragging in the elements, putting in the ID of the elements, my web component gets pulled in, right? So as explained in the previous video, web components are just like any other application. I'm just going to go ahead and edit this text. Just add another phrase. This is a good day. I am going to save and deploy. And as explained in the previous video, web components only have one environment, and changes to a web component once deployed will reflect in every instance of that web component. So I'm going to launch, and I'm going to go back to my application and refresh the page, and you will notice that it pulls in my updated web components. All right, so let's jump into the settings of our web components, and let's just go through from top to bottom. Web components are one of the easier elements that we have on the platform. The only options that we have here are just the app ID, which is what enables the app builder or the application that's consuming the web components to know what web components to pull in. The data parameter, this is a way of passing data into a web component. And then we have the loader color. So when a web component is loading, there is a loader, and you could basically pick and choose what the color of that loader should be. And the title attributes is basically your standard HTML title attribute. And is non-reactive is an optimization tool or configuration used to make web components not react to data changes. For web components, I would probably just leave this as false, as long as you want your web components to react to data changes. All right, so what we're going to focus on here is the data parameter. All right, so data passed in using the data parameter will be reflected in the web component as part of the web component's data. All right, so what do I mean by this? So let's say I go back to my web component and I go to the app data and basically just create a new app data field, and I'm going to call this sample field. All right, and I'm going to give this some data. I'm going to call this data, just give some random. I'm just going to call this random text. All right, so we have sample field random text, right? It doesn't get any more random than this. All right, I am going to save, refresh, and now that is part of my live app data. Once my initial data, not part of my live data. If I were to drag a text block and basically set my text block to use dynamic text, and then set my dynamic text to my random, and I could just click on the quick finder, and I can see here that random text sample field. Select that. There you have it. All right, so I have a sample field in my app data, and it's currently set to random text. I'm going to save this. I am going to launch. All right. If I go back to my web application and refresh, I can see that my sample field is set to random text. But what happens if I come over here to my web components and I basically set my data parameters? What if I set, let's use code here. What if I set sample field, let's fix this, sample field, and I set it to intentional data. All right, there you have it. As you can see, almost instantly, right, sample field has not been set to intentional data. So this goes to the whole dynamic nature of web components. As you can see, we've passed in data from the parent elements or the parent component or parent application into our web components. So you can think of the example of our product list, right? You can think of this as a component that basically shows a product list using a certain type of visual configuration and beauty. But what if we wanted to, let's say, pass in the product list, right? The data into the components. We did not want the component to maybe fetch its own data. We could do that. What if we wanted to pass in the query and other properties that affect the look and feel of an application? We could do that. So this is all made possible by means of passing data from the parent to the child component, which is the main app to the web component. Now, what happens when you want to do the reverse? What if you want to pass data from the child component, which is the web component, back to the parent component? Well, we have that covered as well. If we go into our function builder, all right, so I'm in a test function. All right, I'm going to add a step and I'm just going to type parent. And here we have it, update parent app data. So in using the data parameter of our web components, we are able to pass data from the parent elements to the web components, right? Or the parent application. And honestly, parent elements is more accurate because web components can also have web components embedded in them, right? So you can use web components within web components within web components, right? So parent elements is more accurate. It doesn't have to be a web application consuming a web component. A web component can also consume other web components, right? So, but when we use the data parameter attribute in the web components elements, we are basically passing data from the parent element to the child element, which is the web component. And this is basically being set to the web components app data, as you saw in our illustration, our example. Now, to do the opposite, to basically send data from the web component back to the parent elements, we use a function called update parent app data, and it does the exact same thing. It passes data back. So you can think of maybe a form that you reuse across multiple applications. The form gets consumed if you wanted to pass some data back to do something to trigger maybe in the next action or the next set of actions. You can basically do that as well. All right. So I just wanted to show this real quick. We're not going to save. We're just going to exit. I'm going to go ahead in my demo application and I'm going to go ahead and create a second page just to illustrate using web components multiple times within an application. All right, I am going to go ahead and just copy this app ID, navigate to, let me just save this real quick, refresh. And I'm just going to manually navigate to the second page. I'm going to drag my web components elements into the page, and just like we did before, I'm going to set the app ID, and as you can see, it pulls in the web components. And as you can see, we still have random text. So if we go ahead here and say, let's change this to code. And remember, when you're using code and you're using objects, make sure it's always JSON. So say sample field. I'm going to set this to second page text. All right. And as you can see, it's now second page text. So if we go to the index page, it's intentional data. And if we go to the second page, it's second page text. So you can think of the product list again. Let's say you wanted to have a list for purchased products, and you have a page for purchased products, and let's say you have another page for return products, and another page for products currently in. You can harness the power of web components in and build very, very solid applications without having to build the same thing over and over again. Now, there's just one little caveat. You can only use a web component one time within a page. That's the only shortfalls of web components. They can only be used one time within a page, but they can be used unlimited amounts of times across multiple pages, across multiple applications. Well, that's it for web components. Use them to save time. Use them to build very solid, very reusable components, and make less mistakes. Catch you in the next video.